welcome everybody. Really glad to see everybody here. It's a rich topic today. Look, all of us live in assumptions about how change happens and how minds change, our own minds and other people's minds. And of course, how they don't. We have assumptions about how behaviors change and how they don't. And as Ken mentioned, mind, behavior, and culture are three interpenetrating realms. The work we're talking about lives in all of them. I'm willing to declare that we are, all of us, obsessed with getting other people's minds to change, whether it's, kids or spouses or political leaders or the people on the other side of the political divide, whether we're concerned with climate change or regenerative business or polycrises and things like that. This is something that we all think about, maybe explicitly, maybe implicitly. I mean, look, have you ever tried to change someone's mind? Have you ever tried to change your own mind? You ever trying to change a habit, someone else's or your own? Again, a spouse, a child, coworkers, a dozen coworkers, 100 coworkers, 100,000 coworkers, several hundred million countrymen and women, billions of fellow earthlings. It's not easy to do, clearly, and yet it does happen. And we know this in our own lives. We know this in history. So, I've been obsessed frankly, for decades with the question of how do minds change? How does behavior change? How do cultures change? Been thinking about that since long before the theory of change emerged as a thing in the 1990s. I was actually kind of surprised in the, aughts or teens. I was sort of late to the game, hearing everybody talking about this thing called theory of change that I had never heard about before. But, for me, I'm frankly frustrated with a lot of the conversations I encounter about change. I find the theoretical palette that people are drawing from is puny, thin, limited. The language is sloppy, which suggests to me that the thinking behind the language is sloppy as well. I'm talking particularly about the realm of climate these days, a lot of wishful thinking. It would be good if. We should, they should, somebody should, which of course begs Ken Homer's perennial question of which we are we referring to when we say we. A very useful question to keep in mind because we tend to be a little loose on that. Ken, bring up the slide if you would. I hear way too much reliance on logic, as if facts ever changed minds. I hear too much reliance on fear, as if fear ever durably changed minds and behavior. I hear not enough invitation into the world we want. Power, lots of talk about power, a lot of confusion about power, a lot of aversion to power, frankly, from the likes of us, to the opportunity and need for recognizing power, accumulating power, wielding power. We get confused about our aversion to power over, as it's wielded in the world today, with power in its many other forms. The fundamental physics is the capacity to do work or the capacity to make something happen in the world. Clearly, we want it, even if we're averse to it. So I've been thinking into that a lot and developing some theories and a kind of an initial diagnosis that suggests some key pathways to both understand the mess better, the mess that we live in, and to engage it more effectively. So in addition to those three, I'd say there's a fourth that I'll call desire. We struggled with the name for this. A longing for a world that could be, for the world we want. For some of us, it feels like a calling into that world, an imagination. The calling forward to the future we want, not just opposing the world that we are in and don't like, but the invitation, the solicitation, some would say seduction, that word's got negative connotations in many ways, something that pulls someone forward into a future. And fifth, and this is just sort of forming in my mind, is what, let's call it dignity. Back up a bit. Why do I have identity with dignity? Because there's something about dignity that is saying this is who I am, and something is out of whack with who I am. There's a disjunction, it's a tension that ties in with these others. Give me the next slide, Ken. Just to put them all up on together. The arrows, some of you recognize the co-cycle diagram from Chinese five-element theory, but the suggestion here is these all interrelate in some kind of way. Our palette has been limited. We've lived toward the bottom of this. And I think it's worthwhile to explore the broader landscape that these suggest of how change happens, how minds change, and perhaps how, how cultures change, and of course, how behaviors, habits, practices, what we do in the world, how that changes. Ken, you want to add anything to this, or should we go to a quick poll?
Yeah, I'd like to add. Gil and I have been talking about this for a week now, and we've been all over the map with this, and it keeps morphing and changing. So this is not cast in stone by any means, but it's really interesting to me to take this and say, what am I listening to and listening for out there in the world? When I think of what's going on politically, when I think of going on in the climate or economically, these suddenly put a very different lens on it that helps me see things more clearly. Like, where are people really relying on one or the other of these, and how effectively are they using them? So that's the only thing I want to say about this. Is just how I personally use it as a lens for both listening and looking.
Good, good. So go to the next slide, if you would. Nope, back one. There we go. So let's do a quick poll. Which of these most change you in your experience? Which tend to affect you and have change show up, whether in your personal life, your social, political life? Where do you say? You should have a poll on your screen. Do anybody not see a poll? You do. Okay, there we go. Let's take about 30 seconds, get some votes up here. Which of these drivers most change you?
I see a poll, but I'm not able to access it. I mean,
I see one person who's voted, so something's working.
Somebody's working, but I'm not. Anybody else having trouble getting in there?
There we go. We're starting to see stuff coming in now. And this doesn't have to be the ultimate right answer. What comes up first in mind, what feels most recognizable as what moves you into action or to change your behavior.
Can you put the poll back up for me? I just closed it by accident.
I don't know how to do that.
It's all good. I just did the first question. Sorry.
No, we're just at the first question right now. Oh, I see some of you are going ahead to the second and third question, so you can scroll the poll and get to those. There are 4 questions here.
Gil, it looks like question 2 and 3 are the same.
Well, there you go. That's true, they are. That's an accident of my Zoom editing.
It's a multiple choice quiz. you can choose twice on that one.
I have to laugh because I used 2 different answers for the same question.
Perfect. Well, that's how it is.
See, your minds are changing already.
Okay, so we've got about half of you have answered the first question, about third of you have answered the last question. So let's give this another 30 seconds. And then hopefully this will show us the results. For those of you who just joined us, we're doing a quick poll about drivers of change. Have a vote. Okay. All right, got 80% participation. I'm going to end the poll. Last call. 3, 2, 1. Okay. So here's what we said. Share results. So what do you observe?
I see it's a very strongly desire-driven crowd here today.
Dignity 2. This is not a group of people who are mostly motivated by fear and logic. Although we tend to use logic more than we find it effective. Interesting. So let's open the room. What do you all see here? Either on poll results specifically or opening comments.
Sarah, you've got your hand up.
I would say real change comes from within. I mean, looking at this, desire and dignity both come from within, or the feeling of dignity and definitely the feeling of desire come from within. It's not something people can impose on you.
Well, yes, and they can be evoked by how people relate to you. If someone treats you with respect or disrespect, has impact on your sense of dignity. Some people crumble in the face of that. Some people, take a deep breath and rise up and step into it. So all of these are inner and outer, aren't they? Great question. What else, people? What does this provoke for you?
Well, I just, first of all, it's just a great tee up and context setting, Gil, and thank you very much for framing this so clearly. And I just think the answers to question 2, which I closed mine by accident before voting, but it just, the logic and the alignment of logic and desire seems true to me.
Okay. Which would you have voted for, Jan, if you hadn't closed the poll?
I probably would have voted for logic, but desire is really where I should be focusing, and it's where my strong suit. I mean, it's strong with both, so it's I feel perfectly split. Basically, it's a 50-50 kind of thing.
Okay. And look, we're not in the realm of right or wrong here. There's certainly not wrong answers, and this is not even necessarily the right map. But this is an exploratory for us. We're trying to find, we're finding our way through this landscape, and this is how it looks at the moment. And one of the things we're looking for from you all is this a useful framing to invite people into this exploration? Does this provoke something alive and generative and useful for you that adds something to how you stand and move in the world?
Definitely for me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Others?
Sarah, is your hand still up from last time, or did you want to speak again? Sorry about that.
I think it's still up.
Yeah.
Okay, last great. Time.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
So I think I'm next. I think that in a sense, the responses to drivers of change that people have given us almost aspirational, but also reflects our level of comfort in the world for most of the people who are attending a webinar of this sort or a meeting of this sort. I think fear is probably what most changes people, except that a lot of us have arranged our lives so that we don't have a lot of deep-seated fears. We're not afraid that we're not going to have enough to eat, that we're not going to have a shelter over our heads, those kinds of fears, which were we exposed to them, I think they would become the most important drivers of change for us. And they are for probably a very large percentage of the people in the world. Fortunately, we have managed through luck and efforts and a variety of things to reduce that so that desire has become very important for us.
Thank you. Yeah, Jonathan. We'll need your mic on, Jonathan.
Okay. There we go. This is Jonathan Gelbart from Conservation Value Solutions. And I added this in the comments, but there's a great book called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. It's a fun read. It's a quick read. And they talk about why logical mind strategies are not effective for driving change. And they liken the logical mind of people to the rider of an elephant and the emotional mind to the elephant itself. The point being that if you don't convince the emotional mind, and that's where I think emotion is missing from that last diagram, the rider's not actually going to go anywhere. And the book tells the story of different types of strategies and how they can complement each other, both logical mind and emotional mind strategies. And the classic emotional mind strategy is one that Robert Cialdini has become famous for, which is peer influence. Is what motivates people to change is they see other people doing that new behavior. Working with ranchers as I have to improve management, one of the most powerful things that gets ranchers to change is they look over the fence at their neighbor and they see their neighbor has a shiny new pickup truck. And it's a drought year and their grasses are healthier and their cows are fatter. And they're wondering what they can do to achieve those types of positive results. So it's very important to not only focus on logical mind strategies but also to understand emotional mind strategies. Another one is shrink the change. Big changes are very intimidating. That's why there's a martial arts belt system. The idea of going from a white belt to a black belt is just kind of mind-blowing. And the belt system shrinks the change into a series of confidence building wins along the path. And that's an important emotional mind strategy for driving change in sustainability within organizations, companies, and so forth.
Very nice. Thank you. I like that you shifted at the beginning of your comments. You talked about not logical mind. And at the end, you were saying not only logical mind. It's not that any of these don't belong, but the flexibility to move across this palette and use what's appropriate and have the different kinds of stances within us, I think is part of the suggestion here. What you're talking about of the rancher looking over at the next guy's lush meadow and pickup truck is, part of what I would put in this bucket of desire, or a calling to a future, a sense of a possible future. For me, this has been, before I knew the term theory of change, this has been the theory of change for me in my work at Institute for Local Self-Reliance and the Governor's Office of Appropriate Technology and at Natural Logic has not just to say theoretically this is a great idea, but to say here's an example of something different that's actually working. And you can see it. You can not only see the numbers and see that the numbers are good, but you take the case of the earliest green building movement, walking people into a LEED Platinum building where they feel different in their body. Why? Because, the light is different, the air is different, the air is cleaner, the spaces are proportional. People actually feel something in their body. It's not a logical response, but it's a visceral response to something that's there, and you can't say it doesn't exist. You can't say it's not possible once it exists. And so that's that calling from the future kind of strategy that's very much in line with you and the ranchers. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Who else?
Yeah, Glenn here, if I may. So the way I'm looking at this, so you have these 5 drivers of change. The way that I'm seeing it, I think could help to further define the framework is you have empowering drivers of change and disempowering drivers of change. For example, dignity, desire, logic are more empowering, and power is in something else or someone else having power over us. Could be disempowering as well as fear.
Depending on the power, whose power, how it's deployed, isn't it?
Correct. Yes.
And the civil rights movement accumulated power.
Right. So it's still a power over someone else, and that's something like even if we look at Trumpism in this country, is why do those people? Why are they so fervently loyal to this man? And many of them, as research has shown, are people that feel disempowered. And so that disempowerment is being sort of co-opted for a political serving purpose. And along those lines, Jonathan kind of spoke to something very interesting with regard to looking over the fence at another farmer's land and noticing a nice new shiny truck. Like another driver of change that I found that's very strong that would be implied in that or inferred in that is egoic need or egoic desire. So, for example, the FOMO, fear of missing out, the beautiful, shiny new truck, not necessarily really healthy, lush grass that's growing more lush than what's on my side of the fence. And I'd like to know what he's doing so that I can have better grass. So that would be more about desire. But then there's the FOMO, which is more egoic, which is like, that's a really cool truck. I want one like that because I want to see cool like this guy. And I think that egoic desire is something that is very powerful and could definitely enhance this framework if we looked at that.
Thank you. Jane and then Robin.
I'd like to point out that dignity may not be what we think it is casually on this chart.
Mhm.
It seems to me that fear of shame is really underlying what we think of as dignity, and that human peer pressure is very, very strong.
Mhm. Yep.
I think it's a close second to fear.
Mhm.
As a biological, we're social animals, and I think peer pressure is extraordinarily strong in shaping what we go for or what we won't.
Mhm.
And
peer pressure is a metaphorical term of a physical encounter. How does that show up in a being?
a sense of other people's opinions and judgments.
Okay.
And we live in a national, we used to live in a national media bubble that had us sort of unified around simple news broadcasts. And we're in a mosaic now of news and entertainment and information sources that can result in very unique bubbles and peer group awarenesses that provoke a great sense of disunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, and I want to harp on this as a woman, that I think the male world perhaps does not realize how thoroughly drenched in fear the female population of the world is, how much that's a motivator in marriages and in social relations and in politics. And women's opinions are so powerful and important in life that the control of women seems to be the ultimate strategy of the fascists.
Mm-hmm.
And things that are designed to provoke men in war have a lot to do with cruelty and abuse and torture of women in front of their men.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot going on there.
Thank you for
and
that.
I don't want to be an advocate of fear, but I think we in the comfortable West, I mean, we're growing less comfortable, but we have kind of a naive position with respect to looking at this topic because of how we're insulated from the gut-wrenching fears that provoke most life around in other places.
Thank you, Jane. Got a lot of thoughts, but there's so many hands up. I want to keep moving through the room. Robin, and then David, and then Doug.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I wanted to make a couple of comments just from what I've heard so far, and then dig into the question I have around dignity. So, working in corporate settings for 25 years, I was trained and encouraged to use logic. Being an ethnographer and a researcher, generally, I leaned into storytelling and emotion, as the other speaker said about the Heath book, to evoke that desire. And I think a desire could be unpacked. Maybe desire is more of an outcome than a strategy for driving change. Because, Gil, you spoke to a vision, or, the somatic experience of walking into a future that is possible. So, in design contexts, we build, prototypes to evoke the vision that something could be possible. And either those prototypes are higher or lower fidelity depending on the kind of feedback or the kind of influence that we want them to have. And one reason I was attracted to come to this particular call is the name of my consulting company is called Ubuntu Culture Company, and the word dignity continues to come up for me as a as an embedded concept in the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which means I am because you are, or you can only experience your full humanity in relationship with others. And that affordance of giving and receiving dignity is generative, right? So I guess then when I saw the poll, I became kind of confused as to then how dignity becomes a driver for change, except for maybe a desire or belief that all living things have inherent dignity. So I know you made a comment, Gil, about, the to my question in the chat about dignity, and I had it up and it went away. But I'm interested in, the idea, okay, so if we listen for it and we speak to dignity, that's great. I'm not sure again, like if all of these drivers of change are on the same level and some are outcomes and some are actually drivers or techniques. So I guess that's my question.
A good question. I'm not sure either, Robin. There, as I listen to this conversation and watch this map, all the pieces seem in motion in their interactions, in their roles, in the process of change that you're talking about, in their valences. I mean, dignity, I'll go back to the civil rights movement again. It grew out of an appeal for dignity, a call for dignity, a sense of indignity that people felt in how they were treated and wanting dignity. But in the examples Jane was talking about, we see the diminishment of dignity used as a technique, as a weapon between genders, between cultures, and so forth. So all these have multiple valences, multiple roles in the process. And I guess, where my instinct started here is to say we need a broader palette. We need to be looking at more elements in this landscape that we're playing with, because the reliance on logic and fear doesn't get us to where we need to get to, whether it's with elephants or national policies. Thank you for your thoughtfulness on that. David, and then Doug, and then Daniel, I know you had your hand up a while ago. I don't see it up now, so bring it back up if you want to speak. David Morse, please.
Yeah, for me, desire is kind of key because we all have certain desires are all a little different. So for me, for instance, in the climate world, it's trying to reach individuals, groups, and finding out what their desires are. And then it gets back to some of the things out of Jonathan's, of a step-by-step basis. As one person recently said, is that how leader of one of the larger climate organizations, how did you manage to be as successful as you are? And he said, one person at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was that covered kind of a lot, because we tend to speak to groups, and sure, the group has a overall desire, but then it's made up of individual people who have all these other, the power, the fear, the logic, all of those things in there. But it comes down to basic desire.
Thanks, David. And it reminds me that one of the opportunities for practice in here is learning how to listen for these in the people that we're interacting with, whether it's one at a time or a group at a time. Is where is the person who you're speaking What's the mode that they're going to be receptive to? How do they orient to the world? What do they care about? And can you start to, match up with each other and open a different kind of communication? Doug and then Stuart.
Yeah. What strikes me about this is that it's framed in terms of nouns, and the drivers of change without requires sort of, I think, the idea that I have the ability to change anything or anybody. And my authority and power stops at my skin. So on an elemental level, sort of doing a verb transform, the domain of desire and attraction is actually fire, which is about metabolism, about transformation. And overexpressed, it's the world we live in. Endless consumption and appetite. More, and never satisfied. And logic is the mental body and the function of thinking, clarity, discernment. Dignity, I think the closest I could come to would be space, which is the spiritual domain. Connection to source and transcendence of individual ego. And power and desire are really both encapsulated in fire. And fear is water, which is emotions, which is that mechanism. And viewing the world through a lens of what's imbalanced. One thing about the elements, and I'll close with this, is that when there's imbalance, the question is never to reduce it. The question is what element is missing that's needed to restore it. So I just offer that to add some dimension, and I'm complete.
Yeah, thanks for the dimension. I hinted at Chinese 5-element map a moment ago. We didn't try to do the mapping, and you've just done a version of that. So thank you very much for that. And I invite people to play with this. This is a sketch. This is not a proposition. I will say, Doug, though, you said your power ends at your skin, and that's patently not true, because my neurophysiology, biochemistry shifted in listening to you. We affect each other with these words and with these things that we do at very visceral levels. That's a gift that we have for each other. Stuart and then Michelle. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We've got a lot of folks in the queue here, which is great.
Yeah, you got lots of folks in the queue, Gil, because it's such a provocative topic at so many different levels, and it's many things triggered. So I learned in part in practicing law, which is always about advocacy, from an appellate court judge once, that you always have to act in integrity. There are Greek words for these, and you always have to present logic to enable someone to decide in your favor, and you must present emotion, eros. You have to use a poem or a story or something that moves the heart of another. So I think I burned out on advocacy a while ago in terms of trying to change or persuade people. And so where I am now is just I do my best to share information, and I don't seem to be attached to outcomes anymore. Because as I look out there, and I know, the broader context of this is there's just a lot of stupidity. So why bother, wasting one's presence? That being said, there's a wonderful Zen saying, actually, it's not Zen, it's Leo Tolstoy. everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing themselves. So in some ways, if you really want to create great change, I think you've got to start presencing yourself in a certain way such that people want to model that and create a vision of being pulled forward as all great religions in the past have done. That's enough.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you. I was drawn into the conversation also by the word dignity. This is an unusual one for social change, for climate change, and it was provocative and enticing. Feels important and like a doorway into something powerful. As I listened to you describe the 5 forces, I couldn't help but overlay onto a way that I have of thinking of how life works. And I interpreted dignity as the self, as the inherent power and divinity and access to source, to deep knowing. And I think of that as kind of the roots of a tree, that we have access to something profound within ourselves that is ours to express and offer. And so in appealing to dignity, in creating the conditions for us to exist with dignity, we're allowing that to flow through ourselves. And then I imagine as the offering of the tree, the leaves and the fruit, this is sort of the pull of desire and calling. I think of that as the larger potential, what in the world is calling to us that wants to be made manifest, and how can we in our dignity express that? And everything in between, the trunk seems to be methods and means. We can use power, we can use logic, we can use fear, and we probably use a whole mix of them to navigate and negotiate our own sense of what we are here to do and what is needed in the world. The other thing I wanted to share is we've talked a lot about the very personal access to change, and Stuart in particular. It's start with yourself. I often notice that wise, effective action is an emergent property of a connected, cohesive community. So maybe we need both, but I would be curious how that would show up in this conversation. I know there's the saying, where there's a will, there's a way. And so that sort of implies desire, the will. And if that's the end of the story, then we're doomed because we haven't found the way to address climate change. So clearly there isn't the will. But I think the bigger version of that is where there's a life-aligned worldview that says that way and this will makes sense. Right now, we don't have that. We have a story that says only productivity and profitability matter. So we need a bigger story. We need also the choir. So we need a we, and then we will find the will and the way. So all of that came up as I was listening to everyone.
All of that. Thank you. It's very rich. So much there, Michelle. There's, like I said, all of these things have valences, and the desire piece, which you spoke to very much. Of course, the Buddhists will tell us that, the Bodhisattva vow that desires are inexhaustible. I vow to vanquish them. We know that desire is dangerous. We know that desire is generative. I like your image of the roots of the tree and the opportunity we have, to embody dignity, to model it, to observe it in others, to invite it, to evoke it. The word emerged for me in this exercise, remembering a conversation I had with my teacher, Fernando Flores, last year, and I was talking about my anger at some situation in the world. There are many to choose from. I don't know what it was, but I was conveying a mood of anger, and he said, "You're not angry." I thought, well, who are you to tell me what I am? Right? So I was even more angry. He said, "You're not angry. You're indignant," and it stopped me in my tracks. And something opened that I hadn't ever seen before about this rootedness, as you're talking about. And what's the word? The gap between who I am and who I want to be, the gap between where we are and where we want to be, that had a very different flavor to it than anger. And a very different power, if you will, not in the sense of power over, but power as generative. The power, the roots of the tree, the green sprout that drives through the concrete is a kind of power. So again, there's a palette here for us to work with. Thank you so much for that.
Gil, before you go on, Michelle just highlighted this. You just said something, the difference between anger and indignance. For me, anger is something very personal. I'm upset about something. But when I'm indignant, it's because I feel a shared sense of there's an injustice going on that affects people, and it makes me indignant because it offends my sense of soul. So I just want to point that out, and I don't know if anybody else is resonating with that, but there's a really big difference between, to me, indignation has a tremendous power for change that anger does not. Anger evokes fear, but indignation evokes dignity.
And anger evokes opposition, and indignation has an aspect to it that can invite, perhaps. The instinct, and I hear it echoed in this call, is that there's something there, frankly, that's at some levels a motivation for everybody here on this call in the work that we do in the world. And that's worth surfacing and talking about. So thank you very much, Michelle, for that provocation. Jan and then David. And let's go.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to say, I think it was Stuart who spoke before Michelle, but I loved everything he was saying. I thought that was very profound. I'm just in a kind of interesting, it's just, I just love what you're doing here, Gil, and everybody's contributions. And I realized that I grew up outside the US, so I came back here to observe the insanity of American culture, really since I got back here. And what I call persistent institutional stupidity syndrome is don't make an acronym out of that, is kind of the theme for me since I returned in the mid 60s, and observing, what goes on with the propaganda conditioned society. And I did a dissertation for my bachelor's degree because my dad did one, and I didn't know that there's only one school in the country that requires it. But I did one. And in my dissertation, I was amazed because Paul Krasner and Scoop Nisker got given the Coevolution Quarterly issue in the fall of 1977, and they chose to feature Gene Youngblood's article, The Mass Media and the Future of Desire. And that really organized this interactive newspaper that I published, a 16-page proposal for reciprocal media in 1979. And I just presented it yesterday for the first time. So I'm just going to read you this one quote from Youngblood on the mass media and the future of desire. Desire is learned, desire is cultivated, but we cannot cultivate that which isn't available. We don't vote for a candidate who isn't on the ballot. We can be neither for nor against an issue that hasn't arisen. We rarely select what's scarcely available, seldom emphasized, infrequently presented. We participate only in what's easily and repeatedly available. We select what's there for selection, quite in spite of the fact that we may hold no genuine desire for or belief in any of it. Today, it's essential that we program innovation, schedule it on demand. But the problem is desiring to program it, which requires that perceive the need and understand the possibility. Last paragraph, last two sentences. The challenge of modern times is that of learning to need another way of life. We must increase our necessity so we can increase our perception, so we can mobilize our desire. But we can't cultivate, that is, increase the necessity of what's not available. We can't really desire that which we can't vividly imagine.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. David, then Alan. Thank you, Jan.
Yeah, I don't mean to be flip, but I'm gonna put in a word for fear.
Okay.
So fear is famously not able to be sustained when
people are afraid of something that seems very overwhelming. So the classic example is activism for nuclear disarmament or limiting nuclear weapons. The nature of the threat freaks people out, and it can get people into Central Park for the largest gathering of human beings in America in June of 1982, but it tends not to be a sustained movement, and that's what it is that people are afraid of. But on the other hand, another technology issue with another kind of fear that seems to be amorphous is the fear of poisoning from fluoride. It was actually the most contentious issue in local politics in the United States for 15 years, 1950 through 64. Every single time it was up for election, people weighed, well, there's this risk of something really bad, and then there are these benefits for a small group of children for whom there'd be a dental benefit. And every time that was sort of rational but fear-based, depending on how you flavor your sociology, every single time it went down. And so it was a very effective strategy to whip up fears of an unknown poisoning risk from fluoride, and you won every time, but you couldn't sustain a really big, long movement beyond particular tactical demands around particular legislators when it came to nuclear disarmament. So what the fear is, what your goal is in using it as a tactic, it's complicated. And then on the other hand, the resistance to the Negro civil rights movement seemed to be entirely about fear. They're gonna do my daughter was at the core of what I heard growing up over and over again from scaredy cat, scared white people. So anyway, so my point is fear needs a lot of texture and the time over which it's active. And I wouldn't want you to underestimate the power of fear.
Noted. And, I'm very clearly not trying to rank these five in any sort of priority order. They're all there. As I said, they all have multiple valences. We would not be here evolutionarily without fear as a protective response against danger. We also know that if we physiologically stay in fear the whole time, our bodies fall apart. So it has its place.
Yeah.
It has its dangers.
Yeah. I also grew up in a dangerous neighborhood, and it got more dangerous as I grew up. And the memory of that and this weird, surreal sense of relief when crime rates dropped drastically is really part of my constitution. So it's different when you've been in an insecure environment and built to be wound up all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And all of us, I'm going to speculate, have felt fear, perhaps have used fear, perhaps have been afraid of fear, but it's part of the Constitution that we are made up of here. Thanks for that, David. Alan and then Mark.
As I invited Mark Wagner to join this, and I'm glad he's here, eager to hear what he has to say. Myself, when I first heard this question, in my simple-minded old way, got all these things. I said, love is all there is. It is an attraction. It is a desire. It is sometimes free in the heart. And later on in the conversation, the heart and the soul were also mentioned, not part of these guiding words. And then I thought, it's really a matter, are we free actually to move toward a change that is from our love? Or are we unfree, like we are in this system of war and domination, where in some way we're trying to deal with a power structure and we're trying to heal from the injuries caused by that? So anyhow, I just want to put in for love and the alignment of oneself with the larger vibratory rays of the society that move one to greater beauty and appreciation. And as someone said, looking at the African culture, when we see us as all as related, we are all connected, and that we change when we align ourselves in a beautiful way with that sense of connection. Anyhow, thank you always, Gil, for this, and eager to hear from Mark Wagner, an old buddy from Ann Arbor.
Thanks for those thoughts, Alan. Hello, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for putting this on. This is a wonderful gathering from what I've heard. The high fidelity of the dialogue is wonderful and very, very welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to talk.
Others who are new, we meet every month, the third Wednesday of every month in this time slot. So you're all welcome to come back. Bring your friends. Mark, back to you.
Yeah, I immediately, when I watched a couple of your videos, Gil, I just signed up for all of the Wednesdays till October, I think. It's, like I said, good to have rich dialogue about these things. And I want to just start by saying, I think the language itself has many layers to it. There are different definitions for terms in how we relate to this, and the meaning or the fidelity of meaning, how clearer are the relationships. There was somebody said about imbalance. Well, if we look at how this, how to change minds, I think it's a matter of uncovering the mind with too much experience that covers it up, right? So for example, experiences that come in too much too fast get recorded in the body because we haven't processed them. So shock ensues in very many cases. There's a lowering of consciousness and a recording of the body. I refer to that as the subconscious mind. And we then look through that as a lens, say it's a field, like we have a field around us, many fields around each organ even. That field contains the experience because it went through that field to hit the cells. And that becomes the field through which we look about 95% of the time. It's that protective mechanism, that survival mechanism. If you haven't processed an experience, well, we're going to go on automatic for that experience. We react instead of act. I think this is important only because what that type of experience does is it covers up some aspect of consciousness that is a change of mind to a less limited mind or a more present mind. And that is another aspect of changing minds, is can we uncover the minds that have been covered up by trauma, by experience?
Yes.
And when we get to that richness, I included in the chat a link to a diagram called the spectrum of consciousness. It comes out of a multidimensional psychology known as the gene keys. If you haven't heard of the gene keys, I highly recommend it. It is how to uncover consciousness. And that, I think, changes the mind in a beautiful way. I apply this in my field, which is cybernetics. My definition of cybernetics is design in harmony with how nature works. And there's no need for war. We don't have the or, either or, is just a subset of always both and. And I think when we change minds, I think we start there because both values are important. But what can we get when we combine the two? And one more point, and then I'll finish, which is nature tries to find dynamic equilibrium. Nature also tries to find a flow state, the path of least resistance. And when we think of the whole evolution of what's happening right now is that we have an ability to start finding these flow states. With artificial intelligence, which is where I have been working since, since the 70s. But I'm also a deep nature connected being. I'm out in nature 5 to 20 miles a day, tending to forests. And the rest of the time I'm on Zoom calls like this. And I design things especially in artificial intelligence, to be the solutions to come out in harmony with how nature works. It builds in ethics and it builds in scalability. And that's how I think we can solve so many of these problems, is we can have an extension of mind, an expansion of mind.
Thank you so much, Mark. Sorry to cut you off. We've got other some things. I just want to add one note here. Just to note, this conversation is filled with metaphor. Most of the words we use are metaphors for something. Even the word mind, we should have word mind in quotes, because mind isn't something that's happening in my head. Maybe not even in my body, but maybe in this conversation, maybe in the culture that we live in. You talked about processing experience. That's a computer science or an industrial metaphor on what's going on physiologically, neurologically, psychologically. Not that it's wrong, but it's a metaphor. And if you go back and listen to the recording of this conversation, you'll see that all of us are speaking metaphorically about phenomena that we don't know how to describe or point to in any other kind of way. Not to say there's anything wrong with that. That's what we do as human beings. But maybe illuminates something, maybe opens something up. Mark, thank you. Lauren, and then Jane, and then we're going to shift a little bit.
Yeah, hello everybody. My first time on this call. I'm so happy it's happening and everybody's really, super engaged on this. Michelle was talking earlier about the choir, and I'm thinking, as we're herd animals and we really need to work with collective action and purpose and desire, Jan Ballard and I have started what we're calling the People's Company Commons. And this is a for-profit that would organize us in like an organism to really have collective action and incubate companies that are really doing the regenerative work and that we'd all own a share in. So that's seems to be what we've come up with is, and there's about 20 of us working on this now, very early stage, to actually put what we're talking about into motion and create also a scoring system that would help represent our values, a filter. So everything we see in the internet, every action we do would actually be regenerative to as much as possible. And so politicians, companies, products would all have a people's score that would be the higher the better and no upper limit. So it would create the positive feedback loop for us to express and actually move things forward. So more on that later.
How has this conversation affected your thinking about that?
I think, the motivations of myself, which I put down desire, and then, the dignity and logic, that those are driving, at least this choir that is singing today here together, because we're really looking, for like-minded people that really want to make this happen. We have the potential to really do collective action now. And so this is, this conversation's very profoundly influencing our work. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being here. I hope you'll come back again. Jane Bird, over to you. Need to unmute, Jane.
Okay. First thing is I wanted to put in a plug for desire. I think Buddhism is often misunderstood on this point. We think that Buddhists want to vanquish desire. I think the actual relationship there is a vow to extinguish attachment to desire. Desire is the juice of life. You know, this it's a mistake to dismiss desire as something to be extinguished. The second thing is artificial intelligence is a sad misnomer. I think at best it's a simulated intelligence, and beyond that, it's possible that it's an extended intelligence of ourselves. And I really, really love the idea of maybe focusing some of our future conversations on the cybernetics of finding those flows and harmonies, because change is always happening. Change is a constant, but our understanding of how to ride and how to surf, forgive me the religious language, but how to surf the desires of God or the passion play that may be the universe. Evolution does seem to be a learning curve, and finding our way in relationship to that seems to depend on some degree of contrast in our experiences, and may they be less and less brutal. May we find more and more subtle experiences of contrast, so that we can be more compassionate in our learning on this curve.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. What a wonderful conversation. So many gems offered from so many of you and so many different flavors. And I know those of you who haven't spoken are very alive in this conversation also. So thank you for that too. Ken.
So this has been really wonderful and rich, and sitting here going, I could just talk forever on any one of these points, but I'm trying to learn and not preach, so I'm being quiet. Let's take this in a slightly different direction. Let's look at moods as related to this. So it's a slide Gil put together. You know, we've talked on this call a lot about moods, and moods are sort of the climate in which our emotions occur. They're long-term feeling tones, and moods very much color the way we see the world, and they very much color the kinds of assessments we make about the world, which then open on or close possibilities. So here's something from Bob Dunham, just very basic 4 moods of life, interpretations about the future. When you think, let's take a climate, for example. We've talked a lot about climate on this call. When you think about the climate conversation, what moods do you find yourself in? Are you resentful? Are you ambitious? Are you accepting? Are you resigned? Where do you find yourself, and what do you listen for? Just take a minute and think about that.
And while you're looking at that, the reason that we're offering up this map in addition to the other map is that this is a kind of a little window into a way that Ken and I have learned to stand and work in the world over these many years, and the ontological work that we've been doing. We've found that paying attention to mood, both our own and those of other people that we encounter, is really valuable. It opens something. Just observing that. Noticing how the moods are intertangled with assessments that we have of the world. Things are good or bad, they're this or that. The moods shape the assessments we're able to make. The assessments we make shape the moods. And again, opening a window into that opens enormous possibility and freedom of movement and potential, both personally and in interaction with others. So it doesn't exactly map onto the 5-star we had earlier, but somehow these things relate. So we want to kind of step into this with you for a moment.
And I just want to say one other thing about this is, you may find that you are not in, you don't have to choose one. I'll put it that way. You might find that you need to have a couple of different moods. I notice over time my mood shifts. So, okay. Shell.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at this chart, and I think we need maybe a different term for ambition because ambition is so colored for most people with the color of greed. And yet, what is being talked about here is the future holding possibilities, and that's much, much broader than financial success. So, I mean, when I see the definition there, the future holds possibilities, and I like it, that to me sings to the part of me that has been an activist since age 12. But when I see the word ambition, I think of people who are mostly working on bettering themselves and not necessarily paying attention to others. So the wordsmith part of my brain seems to be asleep at the moment. I don't have a term to suggest, but it's something I think we might all want to think about.
Let's do think about it. I want to caution the wordsmithing game. We played that for several days on some of the words on the star earlier. All of these have different valences. They mean different things to different people in different cultures and different contexts and different parts of their lives. And I don't know what the right word is, but I would invite you to take the word as just kind of a headline and look at this descriptive underneath it. That's what we're asking you about. You as a
optimism is part of it, I think.
Yeah, so you as a lifelong activist are drawn to the future holds possibilities, and you like it, and you're alive in that, and you feel a sense of identity and maybe dignity in that. Other people don't live there.
Right.
No, I mean, what's the characteristic mood of most organizations in North America?
Generally pessimistic, I think.
Resignation. Nothing can be done. There's nothing I can do. Any of you who are consultants are walking into that all the time. You know that. So I don't care what you call it, but there it is. And I've put up another poll. Just sort of where do you characteristically find yourself on this map? It's not all the time, but the way Bob Dunham would say it, the mood that you live in or the mood that's living in you is the one that's there when you wake up in the morning before your feet even hit the floor. It's an orientation to life, an orientation to the future. It's an already existing interpretation of possibilities for the future. Where are you characteristically, would you say?
And I would point out you need ambition to actually have your feet hit the floor.
I'm sorry, Ken, that was not very audible. Ambition to what?
I said you actually need ambition in order for your feet to hit the floor. Sometimes we lay in bed on the weekend and go, oh God, I'm totally lacking ambition. I don't even want to get out of bed, So I'm just taking a little play on words there, but yeah. Stuart.
You guys see the poll?
I would push back a little bit on putting acceptance in the negative column, or the negative aspect of the chart. It's not? Okay, I guess I misread the chart. I'm sorry.
No, it is. It is. It's listed as a positive passive. So
positive negatives is that way, and active passive is that way.
And actually, Gil, you didn't make your update. Yesterday, Gil and I went over these slides. We changed them. You forgot to put the words in. We're calling it restrictive and expansive rather than positive and negative.
Okay.
Have a value connotation to it. It's not that one's better or worse. They're just different.
Yeah.
One points to open possibility. One points to no possibility. Right?
Okay. Yeah. I mean, what popped up for me is the notion of before you can change things, I think you have to see the reality, whatever that word means, and accept where things are, and then you can move on from there. It's kind of like Joanna Macy's, active hope, which is a wonderful, wonderful term.
Yeah. And someone posted Rebecca Solnit in the chat as well. She's done some brilliant writing on this matter, as has Václav Havel and a number of others. This is an interesting poll. This is, for me, not surprising given who's here in the room. This is an indication of how not representative a sample of a group is. Right? This is a group of people who are oriented around possibility, around possible futures, and are alive in that possibility and challenge. But this may not be what your family or your friends or your neighbors or your clients would map as. And listening for that in them, how they speak, how they hold their bodies, what they do, what they say, is a very powerful toolkit. for learning how to dance, for listening for what people care about and being able to engage them about what they care about. For me, this is one of the places where logic falls short, because what matters to me in a logical argument may not touch on what really matters to you. And if I don't touch that place, no amount of logic will do any good. We see this in the work of organizations like Living Room Dialogues and Search for Common Ground, who are bringing people together from opposite sides of very polar and fierce conflicts, whether it's Northern Ireland or the Middle East or the abortion body autonomy fight in the United States, to bring people together who are at each other's throats to find places where they have common concerns and cares and possibility of common language and a possibility of inventing something new together other than just going to war. So, any reflections on this?
What were the two words that you were supposed to have replaced in there again?
Instead of positive and negative, you're going to have restrictive and expansive.
Expansive and restrictive. Replace positive by expansive and replace negative with restrictive. Opening of possibility, closing of possibility.
Mr. McCrae.
Gil, you put this up on Facebook, I believe, a while back. And my response, and my response there was that they're all related. So you accept what's there. You know that it's been created by people who are not you, who have power, to a certain extent, have power over you. You have the ability to work with what is there within the power structure that is in order to make a better future. And then I forget what the fourth one was. But all of these are wrapped up in each other, in the reality of what is here. And then in your experience of working with trying to do something that makes sense to yourself and the others around you. So I've not found this to be all that useful for me.
Okay.
Because it's all there and you cycle through them. The reality is that we live in a world that we didn't make.
There's the key, George. You cycle through them. Some people tend to be characteristically more in one place than the other and don't move. Some people move fluidly across them. Some people can learn to dance with that. Let me give you a story. I had a coaching client I was working with yesterday. It was funny because it was almost the same conversation as with another coaching client a couple of weeks ago. This person said, he said something about other people he's working with. And I said, so it sounds like you have an assessment about the assessment that they have, about your assessment about them. And he cracked up because, of course, that's what was going on. It was opinions about opinions that had not even been spoken. He was in a mood of resentment because of these unspoken statements. Simply turning a light on that, the mood lightened. His mood moved from resentment to acceptance, and then into ambition and possibility about, well, what can I do here with these people? How do I enrich this relationship and take us both to somewhere we want to go? He could have been stuck. He chose not to be. Some people live their lives in resignation. Nothing I can do about anything. Look at the American political landscape. There are people living their lives in resentment. It's their fault. It's all about them. It's all their fault. That's a place to live. There's the opportunity to move across this map if you start to see the pieces and start to dance with them. So, as always, George, your mileage may vary. Dale.
Thanks, Gil, and thanks everybody. I really relate to that cycle through the others because when I answered it for myself, and I think I took Ken's advice and I took two, even though the survey could only do one. I cycled through the other two, but what I did is I said accepting headed toward ambition.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean accepting, and someone mentioned this a little earlier, almost in a kind of Buddhist sense. of being able to accept what is happening in this very moment as a way, I think somebody did say this, as a way to be able to, the only chance we can move beyond it. And so then the only other quick note I wrote is I said, there's this kind of doom delusion thing that happens. And the note I wrote was oscillation, I should say, is Earth overshoot. I don't want to freak you out, but neither do I appreciate your snoring.
Okay.
Thanks, Dale. That's I find myself schizophrenic on this. There's some days when I'm like, okay, I know things are really bad. I've been studying ecology for 37 years now. I could sit here and talk for an hour about how horrible things are. Also know that's just going to freak people out, and it's not going to stop them from snoring. So when I find myself really stuck in that, I think, what can I do to put myself into acceptance of that is the way it is? And from there, what can I actually do about it? Which puts me into the mood of ambition, and then I get into wonder and curiosity. And some days I'm just stuck. And other days I'm like, okay, I've been stuck here for a week now. I got to get out of this. Usually I go for a walk in the redwoods. That helps a lot, and then it's like, okay, now what is actually possible here? And so this ties into, we're not going to have time to go into today, but this ties into the assessments that I make. If I'm in resentment and resignation, and I know a lot of people in my age cohort who say things like, well, I'm just glad I'm old and I'll be dead by the time shit really hits the fan. And I think, what about the people who are coming after you? What about your children, your grandchildren, even if they're not yours? Don't you have a responsibility to them? What do you mean you're just glad it's going to happen when you're dead? I mean, come on, wake up, So I find myself being resentful. Like, okay, that's not going to work either. How can I gently wake them up? And there's an old saying, you can't wake someone up who's only pretending to be asleep. So then we have the folks in the denial, right? And how do we wake up people from denial? It's a whole different story. But I make assessments based on my mood of what's possible today. If I'm in a resigned place or a resentful place, my assessments about the future feed that mood of resignation and resentment. And if I can shift to, there's always things I don't see, there's always possibility, there's always something else, then I can actually start to have some agency and feel like I'm effective and do something that makes me feel like today was a good day. I got something accomplished. I had a great conversation with somebody and they saw things differently. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I just want to help people see things differently and let them make up their own mind for themselves when they have new perspectives.
Yeah, here's the joke about all this. You always have a mood. Or, as some would say, the mood always has you there before you are. And you're always making assessments. And it's not that making assessments is a good or bad thing. It's what humans do. We engage the world through our interpretations of the world. And what we're suggesting is that it can be valuable to take a look at both of those phenomena, shine a light on both of those, and inquire into the mood and inquire into the assessments and look at the tangle and, ask some questions. Make some moves. Sometimes the move is to change the assessment and see what happens to the mood. Sometimes, as Ken said, it's to go for a walk in the redwoods, which will change the mood because physiology and oxygen and trees and, tens of thousands of years of experience of walking in forests that will change the mood. And then lo and behold, the assessments open up and different possibilities emerge. So it's an exploration we've been doing for some years. It's one we invite you to play with. We'll talk about it more in forthcoming calls. And we are close to time. What to say by way of wrap up?
I'd just like to say thanks. I mean, if we had time, I'd love to know what, if anything, shifted for you as a result of this call. And if we were to come back and revisit it, take some time, send us a note. If you're going to revisit this call, which I'd love to do, what would you change next time? Where should we aim ourselves? What else could we do?
We'll send out an email and maybe link to a survey or maybe just an email to prompt you on this. We'd love to hear back from you. As Ken is saying, so please, don't be shy about that. It's private communication, not posted in the chat like here. So be frank, be specific. Tell us how this can be, how we can make these calls better. We're back again a month from today, third Wednesday of every month. There's the date. There's the registration link. Archives. This video will go up in the archives maybe late this week, probably early next week. We've got 5.5 years of archives there at your service. And new for some of you, you can now talk with me in quotes, an AI simulation of me, trained on these calls, all my coaching conversations, anonymized, my writings, my speakings. I offer that to you both as something to have fun with, may be useful for you, and I'd also welcome your feedback on, is it useful? Is it valuable? Is it stupid? What possibilities do you see for tools like that? Ken will give us our musical outgoing reminder.
And now, without further ado, a little Brandy Carlisle.
Because this is the message that I hold in my heart all the time.
You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye.